The Imperial Navy, or Navis Imperialis in High Gothic, is one of the armed forces employed by the Imperium, while the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard, is responsible for the Imperium's ground forces. The Imperial Navy is responsible for the fleets of warships that soar between the stars and planets in the Imperium, as well as engaging threats both inside and outside the Imperium's borders. The Imperial Navy is the military arm of the Imperial Fleet and was, until its separation after the Horus Heresy, a branch of the Imperial Army. During the early Imperium in the Great Crusade era, the Imperial Navy was originally a sub-branch of the Imperial Army known as the Imperialis Armada. During this time, the Imperialis Armada was primarily used for the defense of Imperial space, while planetary invasion was left to the fleets of the Legiones Astartes. However, after the devastating Horus Heresy, which saw widespread rebellion from within the army, Lord Commander of the Imperium Robutier Guillemon felt it prudent to separate the army and navy in order to lessen the threat of future insurrections, just as he had split the Astartes legions for the same purpose. Thus, the conventional armed forces of the Imperium were split into the Astra Militarum for army operations, and the Navis Imperialis for void combat, with independent chains of command. The Imperial Navy was organized into 5 fleets, each assigned to one of the 5 segmenti majoris. Each fleet is named after the segmentum on which it is based. The first and most famous of these fleets is Solar, charged with protecting segmentum Solar, and by extension, Terra and the Emperor himself. As a result, Battlefleet Solar is known as the mightiest fleet in the Imperium, possessing thousands of ancient, planet-killing battleships. Then follows the fleets Obscurus, Ultima, Tempestus, and Pacificus, each charged with defending their broad territory. To accomplish this, they are broken into smaller subfleets called battlefleets. These fleets patrol individual sectors and subsectors and are generally named after the area they safeguard. A number of these fleets have become legendary on their own, such as Battlefleet Gothic, which was once led by the famed Admiral Spire. The Imperial Navy is headed by the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, who is often one of the High Lords of Terra. He oversees 5 segmentum Lord High Admirals. Below the Lord Admirals are various sector and battlefleet commanders, then individual ship captains and junior officers, and finally, a myriad array of non-commissioned officers. The Imperial Navy has a corps of commissars that oversee the morale and discipline of naval personnel, known as the Fleet Commissariat. To facilitate this chain of command, every fleet has a sprawling headquarters in their sector. Solar's is on Mars, Pacificus the Forge World, Hydrafur, Obscurus the Forge World, Cypramundi, Tempestus the mineral-rich world of Bacca, and finally Ultimas on the planet Kar-Dunyash. The Imperial Navy also operates naval security battalions, also known as naval armsmen. These consist of units of armed soldiers intended to put down mutinies, board enemy ships, and protect Imperial Navy installations. Typically, naval security troopers are equipped with black body armor and shotguns. Imperial Navy vessels require personnel from other Imperial elements to function. These include navigators from the Navis Nobility for navigation, astropaths for interstellar communication, and tech priests from the Adeptus Mechanicus for higher maintenance. One of the foremost duties of the Navy is to transport the Imperial Guard to war zones, and as such, every Navy vessel, no matter how small, will sport some means of training deck to accommodate them. The lowest level of personnel in the Navy hierarchy are bondsmen, who are little more than slaves. Alongside servitors, these poor souls undertake the most thankless and dangerous tasks on a vessel. Bondsmen are acquired by various means, such as rounding up criminals or unsavory elements of imperial society, or simply being born into their status aboard a vessel. Bondsmen's duties include cleaning, hauling ammunition into weapons chambers, shoveling fuel, and manual labor. Working long hours and only fed meager rations, bondsmen are met with brutal discipline should they protest their status. The Imperial Navy deploys a vast diversity of vessel types, from one-man attack fighters to kilometers-long battleships. Construction of Imperial Navy warships is complicated, obscenely expensive, and often takes place over decades or even centuries. The vast majority of construction is done in orbital shipyards by the Adeptus Mechanicus, but the Navy itself sends specialist technicians to oversee certain critical elements. Other such specialists are sent by the Departamento Munitorum and Administratum to give ritual attention to specialized areas. However, the tech priests do not take part in the construction of two highly classified modules of the warship: the Astropathic Choir, which is built by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, and the chamber for the ship's navigators, which is built by the Navis Nobility. Though the construction of a single new cruiser may take more than a decade, even for a well-supplied shipyard, a Forge World can commission multiple new cruisers per year, thanks to economies of scale, having at any given time a dozen or more hulls in varying stages of construction. As for fleet doctrine, the Navis Imperialis consistently uses several main vessel classes. From smallest to largest, these go escorts, light cruiser, cruisers, battle cruisers, grand cruisers, and battleships. Starting with escorts, these are the smallest type of ship in the Imperial Navy fleets, found in two distinct subclasses. The larger of the two are frigates, better armed and more heavily armored. Destroyers are generally smaller, but they are by far the fastest and most maneuverable interstellar warships employed by the Imperial Navy. They are usually organized in squadrons of 2 to 6 vessels and will always operate as a group. The main task of the escort ships is to serve as a screen for capital ships against enemy torpedoes and attack crafts so that they can get into position more quickly and safely. They are also employed behind the gun line to finish off enemy cruisers that have been damaged so that the larger vessels can concentrate on the most important threats in an enemy formation. Most escort classes specialize in a certain role, such as the Cobra-class torpedo boat destroyers or the Firestorm-class frigate with its armor-piercing prow-mounted lance. Escort ships are normally not more than 1.5 kilometers in length, with destroyers generally being only 750 meters to 2 kilometers from prow to stern. Next is the light cruisers. A subset of the cruiser category, these ships fall in size between cruisers and escorts, mixing the firepower and durability of the former with the speed and maneuverability of the latter. Light cruisers are a fairly common ship class, for they are relatively simple to construct for being a capital ship, and they are uniquely suited for reconnaissance patrols and for making a presence where their speed and maneuverability are an advantage, and where having a larger number of smaller hulls allows the Navy to monitor a wider area of space. That being said, this class is not without weakness, as their inferior hull and firepower means they can easily find themselves severely outgunned in larger engagements. Thus, the next category of ships is cruisers, which generally make up the majority of a fleet. Though not as powerful as a battleship, nor as maneuverable as an escort, cruisers are still deceptively fast and capable of delivering deadly blows. There are multiple classes of cruisers, most based on the same general hull design, but incorporating different combinations of broadside batteries, lance turrets, and starfighter hangars. Cruisers can carry a crew complement of 1,000 to 100,000, depending on the ship pattern. While cruisers are still particularly complex, it is not uncommon for them to be constructed on smaller forge worlds or any civilized world with a shipyard suitable for constructing vessels of their size. Truly, a generalist ship, cruisers' biggest advantage is their tactical flexibility. If, however, ships need to bring to bear more firepower, battle cruisers are called upon. These are based on a hull design that is similar to the regular cruisers, but with additional armor and guns. They also notably incorporate more advanced power distribution systems capable of supporting battleship-grade weaponry in a cruiser hull. This makes them able to send salvos of immensely powerful weaponry into enemy formations from smaller and harder-to-hit frames. That said, they do suffer from a lack of hull relative to larger ship classes and noticeably reduced maneuverability relative to smaller cruisers. The final cruiser class is the Grand Cruiser. These ships are significantly smaller than battleships, yet distinctly larger than regular cruisers. These vessels were a mainstay of Imperial Navy doctrine in the past and are usually very old in design, do not incorporate many features typical in current Imperial Navy vessels like an armored prow, and are not entirely compatible with current Navy tactical doctrine. Due to this, many are retired from active duty but are still used by reserve fleets in emergencies. There are some modernized versions of Grand Cruisers in service, but since they are much larger and more heavily armed than their predecessors, they are often classed as battleships. These kinds of vessels are usually purpose-built or modified from battlecruiser hulls for a specific circumstance, and are fairly uncommon to encounter in the Imperial Navy thanks to the cost relative to the usefulness of such retrofits. On the whole, Grand Cruisers are a sort of shadow of a class. Once a mainstay of Imperial fleets, shifting doctrine has left their role close to obsolete, although many still roam the galaxy bringing fire to bear on the enemies of mankind. This leads to the final class of regularly used ship, the battleship. Battleships are colossal vessels with significant weaponry and shields. They usually serve as the flagship for the admiral of the fleet, though this is not always the case. Although very powerful, battleships are slow to maneuver and cannot react quickly to enemies that rapidly change course. Imperial battleships can have crews of as small as 25,000 and as large as 3 million or more depending on their design, including large numbers of Imperial Navy armsmen to defend against enemy boarding assaults. Battleships can be up to 8 kilometers from prow to stern and displace billions of tons. Because they represent such a vast expenditure of resources and require a fairly advanced technical base, these are typically constructed only in the largest shipyards above the major Adeptus Mechanicus forge worlds. These vessels are precious assets and are carefully husbanded, usually employed in only larger fleet formations. Within these fleets, they provide an invaluably large volume of firepower and hull. They can hit the farthest, the hardest, and be hit the most, but if caught out of position, can easily be overwhelmed and outmaneuvered by smaller vessels and boarding actions. There are various classes of Imperial battleship, but the Emperor and Retribution are by far the most common in the Imperial Navy. On top of these normal classes, many older classes of Imperial ships are no longer in production. One such is the ironclad battleship, also known as adamanticlads. Much like their contemporary counterparts, are vast 8-kilometer vessels that lack the void shielding of their counterparts in favor of meters of adamantium plate armor. These ships, built before the advent of void screen technology, have since been phased out of production for the main part to be replaced by more modern designs. These and many other obsolete classes are still in service within the traitor fleets. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.